What if everything you thought you knew about C. Murder was a lie? For years, the world believed the story was simple. A deadly nightclub shooting, a celebrity rapper, and a conviction that seemed to close the case for good. But now, after decades behind bars, C. Murder is suddenly back in headlines, and people are asking a question no one dared to ask before. What if he never should have been there in the first place? New evidence is surfacing. Witnesses are changing their stories, and insiders are starting to reveal details that were buried for years. Details that don't just poke holes in the case, they completely destroy it. But here's where things take a darker turn, because the deeper you dig into this case, the more it starts to feel like something bigger was at play. Missing evidence, allegations of pressure, claims that the truth was twisted before it ever reached the courtroom. And now, with growing calls for his release, the entire justice system is being questioned. So was C. Murder really guilty, or was he the victim of something far more sinister? Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about one man. It's a story about power, silence, and a truth that someone didn't want you to know. To understand why this case is causing so much noise again, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. Because before the headlines, before the prison sentence, and long before the controversy, C. Murder was already a name people knew. Born Corey Miller, he wasn't just another rapper trying to make it out. He was part of the No Limit Empire, a movement that dominated hip-hop in the late 90s. Led by his brother Master P, No Limit wasn't just music. It was power, influence, and a business machine that changed the game. C. Murder had the image, the street credibility, and the fan base. To many, he represented authenticity. His music reflected real-life struggles, and that's exactly why people connected with him. But everything changed on January 12, 2002. That night, C. Murder was at a nightclub in Harvey, Louisiana. What started as a normal night quickly turned into chaos. A fight broke out inside the club. Tensions escalated, and within moments, a 16-year-old fan named Steve Thomas was shot and killed. Panic spread instantly. People were running. Witnesses were confused. And in the middle of all that chaos, one name began to circulate: C. Murder. From that moment on, the narrative was set. Authorities moved quickly, and before long, C. Murder was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The case immediately grabbed national attention. A rising hip-hop star, accused of killing a teenager inside a crowded nightclub. To the public, it sounded like an open-end shut case. But behind the scenes, things weren't that simple. From the very beginning, there were inconsistencies. Multiple witnesses at the scene gave conflicting statements. Some claimed they saw C. Murder with a gun. Others said they didn't see him anywhere near the shooting. A few even insisted that someone else pulled the trigger entirely. And then there was the physical evidence, or more accurately, the lack of it. No weapon was ever recovered linking C. Murder to the crime. There were no fingerprints, no DNA tying him directly to the shooting. In a case this serious, those details matter. But somehow, the investigation pushed forward anyway. Still, prosecutors built their case around witness testimony. They argued that despite the chaos, enough people identified C. Murder as a shooter. And with the pressure of a high-profile case, the system moved fast. In 2003, C. Murder won a trial for the first time. But what happened next shocked a lot of people. He was found guilty. It seemed like the story was over, but it wasn't, because in 2006, that conviction was overturned. The reason? Jury misconduct. According to reports, jurors had been exposed to outside information that wasn't allowed in court. That alone raised serious concerns about how the verdict was reached. And just like that, the case was reopened. For a moment, it looked like C. Murder might actually get a fair second chance. But when the retrial began in 2009, the outcome was almost identical. Once again, he was found guilty. And this time, the sentence was final: life in prison. No parole. No second chances. At that point, most people stopped paying attention. As far as the public was concerned, justice had been served. Another case closed. Another life sentence handed down. But behind prison walls, the story didn't end. Because over the years, something strange started happening. witnesses began to change their stories. One by one, several key witnesses who originally testified against C. Murder came forward, saying their statements were either pressured or completely false. Let that sink in. People who helped secure a life sentence were now saying they got it wrong. Some claimed they were intimidated by investigators. Others said they felt pressured to identify C. Murder because of his fame and the attention surrounding the case. And if that wasn't enough, new witnesses started to emerge. These weren't people looking for attention. Many of them had stayed silent for years. But now, they were stepping forward with a completely different version of events. One that didn't match what the jury heard in court. According to these accounts, C. Murder wasn't the shooter at all. In fact, some witnesses claimed they saw another individual with a gun, someone whose name never made it into the official narrative. So the question becomes, if multiple witnesses are now backing away from their original testimony, what does that say about the conviction? Because in cases like this, witness credibility is everything. And when that credibility starts to fall apart, so does the foundation of the entire case. But it doesn't stop there. There have also been growing concerns about how the investigation itself was handled. Allegations of evidence being ignored. Claims that certain leads were never followed. Was the right person convicted? Or was this a case where the system needed a result and found one? And now, years later, the situation has reached a turning point. Because with new evidence being brought forward and more witnesses speaking out, the conversation has shifted from what happened to something much bigger. Was this a wrongful conviction? That question is what's driving the renewed attention today. It's why the case is trending again. And it's why people are starting to look at C. Murder not just as a convicted rapper, but as someone who might have been caught in a system that got it wrong. But as serious as all of this sounds, Part 2 goes even deeper. Because the more you look into this case, the more it starts to reveal details that are hard to ignore. Details about who really had power behind the scenes, and what might have been happening out of public view. And if what's coming next is true, then this story isn't just controversial. It's something much darker. Fire. By the time the second conviction was handed down, most people believed the case was finished. But behind the scenes, a completely different story was starting to take shape. Because what didn't make headlines back then is exactly what's raising questions now. After C. Murder was sentenced to life in prison, his legal team didn't stop fighting. In fact, that's when things started to get more aggressive. They began re-examining every detail of the case, every witness statement, every piece of evidence, and every decision made during the investigation. And what they found didn't sit right. One of the biggest issues? Witness recantations. Over the years, multiple key witnesses came forward and admitted that their original testimonies were either inaccurate or given under pressure. Now think about how serious that is. These weren't random people. These were individuals whose words played a major role in convincing a jury to send someone to prison for life. And now, they were walking those statements back. Some witnesses claimed they were threatened with charges if they didn't cooperate. Others said they were influenced by law enforcement during questioning, pushed toward identifying C. Murder even when they weren't sure. If that's true, it raises a massive red flag. Because in any case, but especially one this serious, witness testimony is supposed to be reliable. It's supposed to be based on truth, not fear, pressure, or suggestion. But the deeper investigators looked, the more complicated things became. There were also reports that certain witnesses who could have helped the defense were never called to testify. Why? That's a question that still doesn't have a clear answer. Some of these individuals later came forward, claiming they had information that pointed away from C. Murder, but they were never given a chance to speak in court. If true, that means the jury may have never heard the full story. And that changes everything. But it goes even further than that. Another major point of concern revolves around the physical evidence, or again, the lack of it. In a crowded nightclub shooting, you would expect some kind of solid forensic connection, a weapon, fingerprints, DNA, something that directly ties the accused to the act. But in this case, that connection was never clearly established. No murder weapon was ever recovered. No forensic evidence definitively placed C. Murder as a shooter. Instead, the case leaned heavily on eyewitness accounts, the same accounts that are now being questioned. So if the physical evidence was weak and the witness testimony is now being challenged, What exactly was a conviction built on? That's the question more and more people are starting to ask. And it's not just random voices online. High-profile advocates, legal experts, and even celebrities have started speaking out about the case. One of the most vocal supporters has been his brother, Master P. Over the years, Master P has consistently maintained that C. Murder is innocent, but recently his message has become more urgent and more direct. He's been pushing for a full review of the case, calling out what he believes are serious flaws in the justice system. And he's not alone. There's been a growing movement demanding justice, with supporters pointing to what they see as a pattern of wrongful convictions, especially in cases involving high pressure and public attention. But here's where things take an even darker turn, because some people believe this case wasn't just flawed. They believe it may have been influenced. There are allegations, and again, these are claims that have been widely discussed, that the investigation may have been shaped by outside pressure. Pressure to close the case quickly. Pressure to deliver a conviction. Pressure to show that justice had been served. When a case gets this much attention, it doesn't just stay in the courtroom. It becomes political. It becomes public. And sometimes it becomes about more than just the truth. Now, to be clear, proving something like that is extremely difficult. But the fact that these questions are even being asked shows how much doubt has grown around this case. And then there's the issue of timing. Why are so many witnesses speaking out now? Why are these details emerging years after conviction? Some people argue that time changes everything. Witnesses who were once afraid may now feel safe enough to speak. People who stayed silent might finally be ready to tell their version of events. But others see it differently. They question whether these late statements can truly be trusted. And that creates a complicated situation. Because on one hand, you have new information that could point to a wrongful conviction. On the other hand, you have a legal system that has already made its decision. So what happens when those two things collide? That's exactly where this case is right now. Caught between a past verdict and a present full of doubt. In recent years, C. Murder's legal team has been working to bring this new evidence into the spotlight. They've filed appeals, requested reviews, and pushed for the courts to take another look at what they believe is a deeply flawed case. And while the legal process moves slowly, the public conversation is moving fast. More people are becoming aware of the inconsistencies. More questions are being asked. And more attention is being placed on what really happened that night in 2002. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about one person. It's about the integrity of the system. If someone can be convicted based on questionable testimony, if evidence can be overlooked, if key voices can be left unheard, then it raises a much bigger concern. How many other cases might have similar issues? And that's why this story continues to grow. It's no longer just about C. Murder. It's about truth. It's about justice. And it's about whether the system is capable of correcting itself when mistakes are made. But as heavy as all of this is, the final part of this story might be the most shocking of all, because there are still details we haven't touched yet. Details about what's happening right now. Details about the latest developments that could change everything. And most importantly, what this means for C. Murder's future. Because if the momentum continues the way it is right now, then this case might be heading toward a moment no one saw coming. And trust me, now, after years of silence, appeals, and unanswered questions, this case is closer than ever to a breaking point. Because what's happening right now isn't just speculation anymore. It's action. In recent years, C. Murder's legal team has been pushing harder than ever to get his conviction overturned. They've gathered new statements, highlighted inconsistencies, and built a case that challenges almost everything the jury originally believed. And for the first time in a long time, people in power are starting to listen. One of the biggest developments came when new witness affidavits were officially submitted. These weren't rumors or online claims. These were signed statements, legally documented, from individuals directly connected to the case. And what they said was shocking. Several witnesses who once pointed the finger at C. Murder are now saying they were wrong. Some claim they never actually saw him pull the trigger. Others say they felt pressured during the investigation and gave statements they didn't fully believe. Think about that for a second. A man is serving a life sentence, and the very people who helped put him there are now admitting their stories may not have been true. That alone has forced many to stop, and rethink everything. But even with these developments, the legal system doesn't move quickly, because overturning a conviction isn't just about new evidence. It's about proving that the original trial was fundamentally flawed, and that's a very high bar to meet. Still, momentum is building. There have been increasing calls for clemency, a legal process where a governor has the power to reduce or completely overturn a sentence. Supporters argue that even if the courts don't act fast enough, clemency could provide a path to freedom. And this isn't just coming from fans. Public figures, activists, and legal advocates have all joined the conversation, pushing for a closer look at the case. They're pointing to the recanted testimonies, the lack of physical evidence, the questions surrounding the investigation, and they're asking one simple question: is it possible that a mistake was made? Because if the answer is yes, then keeping someone behind bars for life becomes a much bigger issue. But here's where things get even more intense. Because while all of this is happening publicly, there's still a lot we don't know. There's still unanswered questions about that night, still gaps in the timeline, still details that don't fully add up. And in cases like this, those unknowns can be just as powerful as the evidence itself. Some believe the truth has already been uncovered, that the new witness statements are enough to prove C. Murder's innocence. Others believe there's still more to the story, that something or someone hasn't been fully revealed. And that's what keeps this case so complicated. Because it's not just about what we know, it's about what we might never know. But one thing is clear: the narrative has changed. This is no longer just a story about a rapper convicted of crime. It's now a story about doubt, about possible injustice, and about a system being forced to confront its own decisions. And maybe the most powerful part of all of this is time, because C. Murder has now spent over 2 decades behind bars. Think about how much life that is. Years that can't be given back. Moments that are gone forever. And if it turns out that this conviction was wrong, then the consequences go far beyond just one case. It becomes a symbol, a reminder of what can happen when the system gets it wrong. But at the same time, there's still uncertainty. Because as strong as the new claims may be, nothing is guaranteed. Appeals can be denied. Clemency can be rejected. And the system doesn't always move the way people expect. So right now, everything hangs in the balance. A case that once seemed closed is now wide open again. A verdict that once felt final is now being questioned from every angle. And a man who was once seen as guilty without a doubt is now at the center of one of the most controversial discussions in recent years. So the real question is, what happens next? Will the courts take another look and come to a different conclusion? Will clemency offer a second chance? Or will this case remain exactly where it is, surrounded by doubt but unchanged? Because no matter which side you're on, one thing is certain: this story is far from over, and the truth, whatever it may be, is still fighting to come to the surface. If you've watched this entire video, then you already know this case is not as straightforward as it once seemed. For years, people believed the story was closed, a tragic shooting, a quick investigation, and a life sentence that ended the discussion. But after everything we've covered, the recanted testimonies, the missing evidence, the conflicting witness statements, and the growing number of questions, it's hard to look at this case the same way again. So now I want to hear from you. Do you believe the justice system got it right in C. Murder's case? Or do you think there's enough doubt here to seriously question the conviction? Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about one man or one verdict. It's about something much bigger: trust in the system, fairness in trials, and whether every person truly gets a fair chance in court. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read them, and I want to know where you stand on this. And if you found this breakdown informative or eye-opening, make sure you hit that like button. It really helps push these stories to more people who need to hear them. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're into deep dive cases like this, where we break down the truth behind headlines and go beyond what mainstream coverage shows you. Because stories like this don't end when the verdict is read. They continue for years, sometimes decades, as new details come to light. And if you want more cases like this, where the truth isn't always clear and every detail matters, then you're in the right place. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next upload. And remember, the truth doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it just takes time to surface. fire.